excellent. So we'll walk through a few different things here in Applicant Portal. We'll do account creation. And there's really two different avenues to account creation. That's for a brand new individual in the system or for someone who may already have benefits. We'll show both of those and then walk through the Snap application together. And with any time left over, we can go over questions and then hopefully also give a short look into our mobile application. So that being said, on the screen here, you should see the main landing page for Oregon One eligibility. And I'm going to refresh it real quick. This is our testing environment. It does time out occasionally and may run slightly slower than the production environment. So just bear with us as we move through here. So first we'll go to apply benefits. And here we have the option of setting up an account for either an individual or an authorized representative. Authorized representatives are individuals who can apply for report changes and receive notices for individuals receiving benefits. In this case, we'll set up a case for an individual. So on this first screen here, we're setting up a username and entering the email address. And when we click submit here, it's going to send us a verification. I'm using a mock email address at Mailinator. The verification email we receive in this training is going to look slightly different from what a Oregonian would receive when they're using the system. But essentially, this is verifying that the email they put in is correct and that we can move forward with account creation there. So as I mentioned, this is slightly different than what a user would see. They would get a like, click here and verify your email address. I'm going to input this. Oops, I lost my page here. Input this URL here, and it'll bring us to the page that after email verification, an individual would land on. So we've completed step one of creating the account, which is verifying that email address, and we'll click step two to continue. So we'll do our reCAPTCHA thing here. And this part can be tricky for people because as you see, I just did the reCAPTCHA. Everything looks good, but these fields are still grayed out. The way our system is set up, you need to click verify once more after doing that. And then we should see these fields open up. So this next screen here is our user verification. We use a process called RIDP, Remote Identity Verification Processing. And it's essentially trying to look in the system to see if we have this individual, if we can make a full match or a partial match, or if it's a brand new individual.
I'll jump in and say it's a problem in the system when people create accounts and we don't get the match because often there will be multiple versions of the same person that have to get sorted out by a eligibility worker.
Absolutely. So yeah, being able to help guide individuals through this process if they already have an account is helpful to let them know that they don't need to create a new account every time. They should be able to maintain that same account that they have. Our password process does require a password reset every 90 days. So that's definitely a sticking point that can cause confusion for people sometimes that can lead to those duplicate accounts. So if someone you are working with seems to be having trouble, maybe try resetting a password for an email that they've used in the past or a login that they've used in the past. So here I've entered an individual who exists in the system already with a case that I created in our training environment, and they should have approved benefits already.
And while you're setting that up, I'll just, Farron had a comment in the chat about how People tend to want to use the paper application just because of all the hoops here and places where people get stuck. And we're hoping that by doing presentation like this and getting people comfortable, that hopefully more people will be willing to brave all this and get the benefits of this system. But some people are always going to want to just make a phone call or do a paper application too. I totally understand that.
Definitely. So we want to provide options for people to apply however they want to apply, whatever works for them. But as James said, hopefully the work we're doing on the system and trying to make it more accessible will lead to folks wanting to apply that way, because our goal is to make that the easiest way to access and access benefits, apply for benefits. So this is the RIDP, the remote identity proofing, and essentially this is a mock screen, but this is where you would see things like, have you lived at this, which one of these addresses have you lived at in the last 10 years? What street address have you lived at before? Things like that. And it'll pull from Experian. And so if an individual hasn't had a lot of credit history, there may not be a lot of information for the system to pull from. If they do run into issues with the RIDP process, they'll get an error that instructs them to call our applicant portal technical team, and those individuals can help folks over the phone and do a manual RIDP process to get them access to the system. So identity has been verified successfully, and this is going to drive us to the individual dashboard in the applicant portal, because as I mentioned, this person has a case that's existing already. Say no to paperless. So when the individual has benefits already set up and they've logged in and they've been fully matched to an individual existing in our system, they're going to land on their individual dashboard here. And we can see that this person has ERDC benefits that are pending. It's asking for additional documents. We have functions here that they can upload their documents directly into this website. They can apply for additional benefits, report changes, update contact information, as well as all these other functions here. And additionally, on the screen, you can see anything that's pending, like I mentioned, employment-related daycare, and then the current benefits below that, which they have active SNAP benefits. You can see the effective date of those, when their next renewal date is, who's included in those benefits, and the ongoing monthly benefit amount that they're eligible for. Below that, we can see medical benefits that they've been approved for, and then any benefits that they've been denied for will show up on the bottom here. Other helpful links here are the verification of current food benefits, verification of current medical benefits. Those will show up under any active program that they're receiving. And that was recently implemented to help provide an easier way for folks to access that without having to go into the office, wait in line, and ask a worker to print that out for them. So we can click that and they'll get that verification of benefits that will help them for all sorts of different assistance that they can receive. So that is pathway one into the applicant portal system with account creation. I'm going to sign out and we're going to start from scratch with a brand new person and walk through the SNAP application process.
While you're setting that up, Pamela has a question. If a client already has OHP and just needs to apply for SNAP, can the eligibility worker use their information that was already uploaded into the OHP application, things like IDs or passport copies? If they already have it and it's in the system, there's a lot of data that can be used to make the SNAP application easier. Of course, SNAP has its own questions, and SNAP will still require an interview too, though. That's my very brief understanding. Andrew, if you have other comments on that.
Yeah, that's correct. Anything that's been verified already in the system should be carried over from OHP. But as James mentioned, there may be additional program requirements for SNAP that that weren't required or that are required separately from medical. So we'll pull over what we can, we'll use what we can, but some things may need to be verified again. And as James mentioned, we'll need a specific interview for SNAP benefits.
While we're on this, would the best way for someone to do that via the one system would be to log in or create their login, connect it to their OHP case, and then on that sidebar, click like apply for benefits and choose SNAP?
Absolutely, yeah. So if on that page before, if I would have, well, they already had SNAP benefits, but if they didn't, if it was only medical and I would have clicked apply now, it would have taken me to a screen that shows any benefits they could apply for that they didn't have. So they would just select SNAP, and we'll see as we go through this application, the screens are dynamically displayed based on what program they're applying for. So it would take them through the application process, would show them screens specific to SNAP, and anything that was able to be pulled from the existing information in the system from medical would be populated there as well. But being that there's, as mentioned, different requirements, some things would need to be entered new for the first time, but that should be ideally the best way for them to apply for new benefits without having to complete a whole other paper application. It should be a little bit quicker and easier to do it that way as long as they're able to get set up and connected to their account. This is a bit of a repeat of what we saw before. It's a similar process, but as we enter the information for this individual, it won't be able to find someone in the system to match them with. So it should take us through the applicant portal in a slightly different way. Let's use a real address. And so before I was using a fake address, but when you use a real address in the system, this possible address match comes up, and this is very similar to really any sort of online-based address entry thing. They'll try to match it with the correct address in terms of USPS or what have you, so that we can get the mail to them as accurately as possible. So you can go with the suggested address, or in some cases, maybe you're living in a space that's split between two different counties, two different jurisdictions, things like that. You can select what you entered and what you know is right. I'll go with the suggested address here. We'll go through the RIDP process again. Successfully verified our identity. And this will now take us to the beginning of the application overview, because our system has not been able to make a match with any existing individual based on what we had just entered there.
And Andrew, there's a question in the chat. How long is the application good for when clients are jumping on and off benefits over time? 5 years, 10 years?
So there's processing timeframes for each individual application. So if they submit a SNAP application, we have 30 days to process that specific application before that application expires, and that filing date expires. The filing date, the date that they sign the application, is when benefits would start from, and it's used for calculating the benefit amount for that initial month. But I think maybe you might be asking about the information from the application, how long that will exist in the system. That we don't delete old information from the system like that. So, if they're jumping on and off benefits, they should be able to that if that individual exists in our system, they should be able to match. And it would create a new case for them after a certain amount of time. But that information, in terms of linking to an existing individual in our system, should still be there.
Gail, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So here is the what are you applying for screen. We'll select SNAP here, but you can also apply for TANF cash assistance, employment-related daycare, medical assistance. The one thing you cannot apply for in applicant portal is TADVS, temporary assistance for domestic violence survivors. That has to be done on the paper application with an in-person interview. Excuse me, not an in-person interview, but submitted on the paper application. So this is asking about any representative information. So this is where you would put in, or an individual would put in if they had an authorized representative. Again, that's someone who can apply for them, report changes, receive notices. It could also be an alternate payee. That's someone who would get their own card that would allow them to spend benefits on behalf of an individual. We're going to say no for purposes here.
And I'm going to hop in and just say that you're going to say no, because that would not be the role of a benefits navigator. That would be the role of like someone in, I imagine, and please correct me, but like someone in the family, or like a professional support.
Yeah, family, professional support, a close friend, anything like that. And part of that process is completing a DHS or OHA form that is verifying information, that this information is being provided on with the client's approval, and that we're not just setting up anyone to access these benefits. So there's a process of verification that goes into attaching someone to a case in that way before they're actually able to access that information.
And the authorized representative would be liable if there's incorrect things entered. You know, it's a big responsibility, not to be taken lightly.
Correct. So on this page, we have household information. It's going to pull over the name and date of birth information we put in on the user verification screens. But one thing we have an opportunity to edit here is if someone would like to use a name that they would prefer us to refer to them by. So we'll say Bob likes to go by Bobby. And then that allows us to select an option of what would that person like to see on their notices. So we'll say he wants to see Bobby Belcher on his notices. And these are part of our Real D questions. So race, ethnicity, language, and disability. These are used for demographics. They're not used at all to determine eligibility for any kind of benefits, but to help us understand who's accessing our benefits, how we can help different demographics of individuals. So important for folks to know that a lot of times these questions can feel very invasive, but the not going in any way towards determining benefits. And hopefully we're using them in a way that's going to allow us to better support different communities that access our services. Is Bobby a migrant or seasonal farm worker? That's part of a series of questions that's related to expedited SNAP benefits. Expedited SNAP benefits would mean their benefit has to be determined within 7 days of requesting those benefits, and there's a reduced amount of verification that's required for a case that would be determined expedited. And there'll be some additional questions that come up that I'll reference in a moment about those as well. And we're going to say that Bobby is applying for himself and a child. So we'll click add member here. So this opens up a second section here that's identical to the one above. And we'll say Gene is applying with him. then asking if Jean is living with Bobby. So any additional person added to the case will be asked if they're living together. This goes towards, for certain household members, determining if they need to apply together for certain benefits, if they can request benefits separately from each other. And that applies specifically to SNAP in terms of, if we have a household made up of family members, who has to apply together versus a household made up of just friends and roommates, who has to apply together, and whose circumstances, income, things like that are taken into consideration when determining eligibility. So we'll say both are requesting SNAP benefits. And then a common thing we'll start to see in this application process are these tabs for different individuals in the household. So this can cause some hangups for folks sometimes. If, as you see here, it looks like I've entered everything on this page, but if I was to go to click next, it's going to give me an error saying, hey, you got to enter some information for Jean over here. So to get there, you just click on this part of the page. Should bring you over there. And now it's asking for Jean's SSN and a question about if Jean is a US citizen. The citizenship question is used for, we do use citizenship to determine eligibility for SNAP, but this information isn't, it's very important for us to not be sharing the citizenship information, beyond using it for our determination purposes. So I know that can be something that people aren't comfortable with sharing sometimes. And here in this application flow on the application portal, it's really just going to ask if they are a citizen or if they're not a citizen. And the worker on the worker portal side will then, if needed, review additional documents to determine if the person's immigration status would make them eligible for benefits. So we will we have an opportunity here after entering a physical address. Well, for one, I should go back. We have an opportunity to enter a home address, a physical address, or there's an option to say, I don't have a home address. And if an individual doesn't have a home address, we'll ask them, where do you spend most of your time? And just get like a city and a zip code, and then allow them to put in a mailing address. So a physical address isn't required to apply, but a mailing address is. So if you're dealing with the houseless population, you may see sometimes that they have certain mail addresses that they use to receive their mail at. That's perfectly fine to use those instead of a permanent address. If needed and someone has a separate mailing address, like a PO box or something like that, that they are receiving separately from their physical address, you can click, I pick up my mail from a different address, and that'll give an opportunity to enter that separate mailing address here. We're going to say Bobby and Jean receive mail at their physical address. And then we ask them how we would like them to reach, how they would like us to reach them. So we can say that don't send me paper copies, just make it only electronic. They can choose from different options here, paper and email, paper, email, and text. We'll say paper and email since he has an email address here. Phone isn't required to provide, but that is one of the ways we'll reach out to try and initiate interview for benefits. So very important that if someone has a phone that they're able to be reached on, that we put that in there.
Andrew, we've got a couple questions too. Is there an audio portion to the application where clients can be the questions can be computer read to the client?
Not internally from ours. We would need to be using some sort of either native functionality in whatever browser they were using, or a plugin, or some type of screen reader. Like I know JAWS is one that I've used in testing. We don't have it built into our system, but our system through testing is tested with those assistive technologies. So it should be able to be used that way. You can't apply for full benefits through the mobile app, but I myself have tested our mobile app and parts of our website with phone narration, with the narration that comes on like an iPhone or an Android. So it does function with that, but nothing built into our system here. And then the next question I see is, what if a student is unhoused and doesn't have a mailing address set up yet? We would need to have some type of mailing address because we need to be able to send them decisions about their benefits. So that being said, there are organizations that will allow someone to have a mailbox. And I would say whatever your local area is, 211 can probably guide individuals to that. If you don't have resources like that in your institution or wherever you're working from. In Portland here, there's a number of different houseless or unhoused organizations that allow people to pick up mail at their locations and use their mailing address. So that's generally what people would do in that situation.
So Gail and Stephanie, are we good?
So this great. This next section here is asking about communication needs. So what language do they use at home? What language do they want us to communicate with them in person, on the phone? What language do we want them to write to them? So in terms of the communicating in person or on the phone, that's going to give us an idea if we need to get either a staff member that speaks that language or connect with a translation service to help this individual. In terms of what language does an individual want us to write to them, that will determine what language we send their notifications out to them in. And currently in the system, we have English, Spanish, Russian, Vietnamese, Somali, traditional, and simplified Chinese. Those for a long time have been the main written translation options that we have. We're currently working on some updates to that to include many additional languages. That's going to be a process that happens over the next few years until we are able to introduce more. I believe these languages were pulled as the most spoken languages other than English in the state of Oregon, and that's why we have these ones currently. And then if Bobby needs alternate format for the notices, we have a number of different alternate formats that we can provide notices in.
I'll add that we are in the process of adding more languages for our notices too. But I can get more information on that if anyone is interested. But I don't have the list in front of me right now.
My understanding is it's a very extensive list, and it's going to be, I want to say like 6 or so at a time, introduced in various builds ongoing over the next couple of years until we get that worked out. But yeah, it's in the process. I don't have like a definite timeline or definite list of like what languages are next, but we're doing what we can to expand that part of our accessibility to as many languages as possible. So we can select alternate formats here, or we can select if the person needs an interpreter. Oops. So you can see there, I clicked next without correctly answering something. It's going to highlight what needs to be answered in red so that you can go back and review that. And as we wait for this to load, the next screen it takes us to should be asking about contact information for the other household member. And we can state here that Jean has the same address as the case address, or we can uncheck that and provide a different address. And similarly, as we get down to the communication needs, we can say that Jean has the same communications needs as Bobby, and we can check that. It'll pull over everything that we entered for Bobby. Or if Jean has additional needs that Bobby didn't identify, we could put that here.
I have a quick question, Andrew.
Yeah.
I'm at the University of Oregon. I just wanted to clarify something that you said a couple of minutes ago, that I guess I was under the impression that you had to be a US resident to apply for SNAP benefits. And I think I'm mistaken, because there's an option on there for resident or not a resident, and you said that the eligibility worker can determine if that person is eligible if they're not a resident, as well as residents. So I think that's great news. I think there are a lot of students that we work with that aren't residents that maybe they qualify. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not that I want to make that determination for a student, but at some point, is there someplace you can direct me so that I can see what kind of immigration statuses might qualify so that I can direct students to that? And it's fine if it's just a web page, or if you can be like, let's table this and we'll send you a previously recorded webinar or something like that.
Yeah, so I think I don't know that there exists a resource like that. I can definitely look into it. I think our kind of default answer on that would be that we don't want you to feel like you have to guide people in whether or not they should apply based on their immigration status. We would encourage someone to apply knowing that we are going to look into their immigration status and need to know more information about that, because there's many different immigration statuses that somebody could have that would make them eligible, would make them ineligible. So we would encourage that person to apply if they feel comfortable sharing that information with us, and then allow our workers to determine. That being said, I can look if we do have something that we're able to share about that. But
I
yeah,
think
definitely
mostly we'd like
sorry.
to see, I guess I'd like to see something that says this, maybe this person, this immigration status isn't like they're on a certain visa and they're like a student visa. And so they're just not going to qualify. We're not going to spend a bunch of time talking to them about SNAP if we know that they're just on that visa and they're not going to qualify. But we do get a lot of DACA and Dreamer students, some refugee students like coming from the Cottage Grove area, lots of migrant students whose parents maybe, maybe they would qualify for Dreamer or DACA status, but they're not in that, they're not in that program. So I guess it's really confusing right now. I've just been asking students, are you a resident? Yes. Then I talked to them about SNAP. I didn't realize that maybe somebody could qualify if they are a non-resident. So I appreciate that. If I get nothing, if I hold on to nothing else, this is something I'd like to dig into.
Definitely. And I see the need for wanting to prevent people from going through an application process that you just know they're not going to qualify for already.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak to every different visa or anything like that. I know,
Sure.
I think like student visas usually not quite eligible, but things like someone who has an LPR, who has refugee status, who's like an asylee, those could potentially qualify for them for benefits. So yeah, I think if there's something that we can share, I'll look for that and hopefully be able to send that over.
That's great. I do see in the chat, Misha has added something. Thank you, Misha, so much.
Yeah, and I want to elevate.
No, thank you, Misha.
Misha pasted a link in the chat about where you can see a list of eligible non-citizens. I just want to clarify, Julia, you're using the word resident. Are you referring to citizen?
Thank you. Yeah. I guess so. I don't know. I mean, I guess, yes. Did it say in the beginning of the application citizen or non-citizen?
The question was, are they a U.S. citizen? And
okay, great.
so
Yeah,
that's
what I'm referring to. Yeah.
Yes or no question to that. And that doesn't, not being a U.S. citizen doesn't automatically disqualify you from SNAP benefits. It would just mean that we have to verify, your immigration status.
Okay.
And to further complicate things, Julia, our higher ed definition of resident in-state versus non-in-state resident is also different from any of this.
Right. And I understand that, and we work with non-Oregon residents for this all the time, but I should have said citizen. Thank you, Zoe, for helping me clarify that. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Zoe. So this next screen here is again part of our Real D questions. The D part of that, the disability demographics, again, not being used at all for determining eligibility, but just determining who we are assisting and how well we are assisting those demographics, and in any sort of gaps or ways that we could do better. So again, this will be information needed to be entered for all of the individuals on the case. I'm entering no for everyone, but just show an example here. If Bobby did have serious difficulty hearing and we answered yes, it would open an additional question that's asking, what age did this condition begin? Safety questions. So as mentioned, we can't apply for TADVS, the Domestic Violence Assistance Grant, on the applicant portal, but we do still ask safety questions. If a person indicated yes to either one of these questions when our workers are screening these applications to process them, it would give us a idea that, hey, maybe we need to reach out to this person in a safe way that and offer them the opportunity to get assistance for domestic violence if that's something they're experiencing, whether that's wanting to apply for the assistance grant that ODHS offers, or if that's just connecting with resources or DV advocates or something like that. So as mentioned previously with the migrant farmer question, this is the expedited SNAP question. So somebody would qualify for expedited SNAP if their total income is less than $150 in the current month, and they have no more than $100 in cash in their bank accounts. Or if somebody is a migrant or seasonal farm worker and has very little money, that would also qualify them. So if we had answered yes to that previous question. So if we say yes here, that they have $100 or less in cash, and does our household gross have gross income less than $150 in this current month? Yes. This would qualify them for expedited SNAP. And then, as mentioned, the processing time frame would go from 30 days down to just 7 because this person has what's been indicated to be potentially a higher need for assistance. And with that comes a reduced amount of verification that we need to do. Essentially, just need to verify for that first month of benefits, the head of household's ID. We would take statements on things that aren't questionable for like income and other things like that, and then do what's called a soft pend in our system and request that information is verified for ongoing benefits, but allow that person to receive assistance right away without having to track down pay stubs, things like that. Again, if they qualify for this expedited service. Disability information, we can indicate here if someone's disabled or permanently blind. For SNAP, really what this is getting at is one of two different things. First is the work requirements in ABOD. If someone's indicating they're disabled, we're not going to ask them to participate in the able-bodied adult without dependence program, which meaning they need to participate in work search for a certain number of hours every month. There's a number of things that can make them exempt from that program, and one of them is being disabled to the point where you're unable to work. The other thing that this would go towards is a program called NED, which is No Income Elderly or Disabled, is what that acronym stands for. And essentially that qualifies somebody for a longer certification period for SNAP benefits. So rather than the regular 12-month period with a 6-month check-in, it'd be a 24-month certification with a 12-month check-in for their periodic report. If there is someone on the case who's disabled over 18, they would qualify for that extended certification period. Household relationships. So this screen is getting further into understanding the relationships between the different people applying, whether or not they need to apply together, if we're going to require information from them. So in this situation, we're going to say that Jean is Bobby's child. Oops, sorry, I did this backwards. The relationship to Jean Belter is parent. So Bobby is the parent of Jean. And we can see once we've entered that, this screen has dynamic logic in it that will say, okay, we entered parent on that other one, so we're automatically updating child here. In this situation, these individuals would need to apply together. Say that they were roommates or adult siblings, they would not be required to apply together. They could choose to apply together if they wanted to, but they would also be eligible to apply each separately for their own benefits and not have each other's income and other circumstances considered when they're applying. But since they are a parent-child relationship here, they are going to be required together, and all of each other's information is going to be used to determine the benefits.
Andrew, I should know this, but is this the updated version that we did, or is it not gone through yet?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
So that will eventually say,
Yeah.
because you could see I entered it wrong, and I've
Yeah.
worked in this system for years. So eventually, what it's going to say is, rather than relationship to Jean Belcher, it'll say Bobby Belcher is Jean Belcher's blank. So hopefully making it a little bit clearer for users to enter without question what this is asking here. So Bobby Belcher is Jean Belcher's parent, and then Jean Belcher is Bobby Belcher's child.
The example of how the system is undergoing constant changes, but that's one example where someone spotted it and it's like, this is confusing. We need to clarify the wording here. So that'll be coming soon.
Yep. So again, this kind of goes back to what I was mentioning about the work requirements for work registration or for able-bodied adults without dependents. If someone is unable to work due to physical, mental, or behavioral health reasons, we would indicate that here, which would exempt them from those work search requirements. And just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, when doing the interview process for SNAP benefits, worker is going to review all this information with the applicant, and those things will be covered. So like if they're made mandatory for the ABOD program, a worker is going to review what the requirements are, what the different exemptions are, and make sure that we're not requiring somebody to do a work search program if it's something that they're not going to be able to complete, or if they have a valid reason to be exempted from that. We have to have certain folks participate in that, but we also can certainly provide exemptions when it's unreasonable to ask a person to do that. So American Indian, Alaska Native, tribal residency lands information for SNAP, it's only going to ask this particular question: does anyone live on tribal land? And that again is going towards that ABOD program. Certain tribal areas are exempt from participating in ABOD, so depending on what the person asks here, may find another reason to exempt them from that. Where does Bobby Belcher currently live? He lives in home, but there's all these other different options that we can put here. So maybe they live boarding school, on-campus housing, dormitory, drug and alcohol facility. If they're homeless, you could enter that, or in a shelter. We'll say in home here. Education and school attendance. I imagine this comes up fairly frequently for college navigators in particular. So it's going to be asking these questions for a few different reasons. So again, with the ABOD program, being a student could potentially exempt you from work search requirements. And if someone is a student of higher education, SNAP needs to determine if they are an eligible student or if they're an ineligible student. Fortunately, in recent years, we've introduced a lot more ways for students of higher education to be eligible for SNAP benefits, which is awesome, because before we had a lot of folks who probably could have benefited greatly from SNAP services that were not eligible based on their student status. So it's going to ask what the highest level of education is completed. Let's say that Bobby has a high school diploma, and it's asking, is he currently enrolled in school? So we're going to say, yeah, he's currently enrolled in school. We'll say he's going to college, university. We're not taking any online courses. When is this expected to be completed? Let's say it's a 4-year program. Say PSU. And then enrollment type, full-time, half-time, less than half-time, more than half-time. Let's say full-time. And then these questions here, along with that full-time, half-time question, is going to be what we use to determine if that person is an eligible student. So one thing that can make them an eligible student is that if they were placed in a higher education through a program like Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act or vocational rehab, if they were awarded federal work study and are working that federal work study. So that should, yeah, if they have they been assigned a work study position in this current semester? Will they participate in that federally funded work study program? Those answers would qualify them as a student of higher education. Or if they're in an undergraduate program, and if that program is going to lead to employment upon completing that education program. So if yes, that individual will be able to start working after graduation, that answer as well would be enough to qualify them as a student of higher education. So any questions on this page in particular? I feel like I'm making an assumption here, but I feel like this is something that may come up frequently for college navigators.
Yeah, it comes up basically every single time I help a student apply for SNAP, particularly the enrollment type question. Particularly at community colleges, students' enrollment type changes every term sometimes, as in they might be applying in July, knowing they're going to be back to school in September, but they're not registered for their fall classes yet. And they don't know if they're going to have full-time course load, three-quarter time course load, half-time course load. That can change every term. And so we often do our sort of best guess on this question when I help students with this application because it's so rapidly changing. And I mean, there are sometimes students who start out a term at full-time enrollment status, which is 12 credits or more, and then something happens in their life in the first couple of weeks of the term where they have to drop one of those classes and suddenly they are half or three-quarter time enrolled. And so I just figured I would mention that because we're frankly just doing our best guess a lot of the time and feeling kind of uncertain about that, feeling a little anxious about that. But it really is so variable.
Yeah, so to expand on that question and to clarify, we're talking about the enrollment type here, the full-time, half-time, less than half-time, or more than half-time questions. That's going to actually be what triggers whether or not we need to determine their student eligibility status. So if someone enters anything from halftime or greater, so full-time, halftime, or more than halftime, or it's also termed sometimes at least halftime. So anything that's less than halftime, we shouldn't have to go through these additional questions here of if an individual it qualifies as a student of higher education. But the more than halftime, or full-time questions, those we will need to answer these additional questions to see if they're eligible. And again, much like the ABOD program, a worker should be walking a student through this to make sure that we have all the information that we can to understand what their student status is to see if we can find them eligible for benefits. So
thank you
oh
so
yeah,
much. This is super helpful. I want to add that students' halftime status is determined by the institution. So each of your colleges will have what you call full-time, what you call halftime, and that's what it should be based off of.
correct. Thanks, Zoe. So any other, sorry, James, go for it.
I was just going to say, Pamela has a question in the chat.
Oh yeah.
About required questions and whether they can be skipped or not.
I believe we could skip it. So, well, now that I've answered it, let me see. Just go ahead and refresh this page and see what happens here. I believe, yeah, you're correct. If it's not a red starred question, it should be able to be skipped. So we'll go ahead and not answer any of those. And what that's going to do, oh, sorry, we got to enter it for Gene. We're say no formal education and not currently enrolled in school and not in school for the last 12 months. So that will let us proceed. But what that's going to do is it's going to mean that the worker is going to need to clarify that with the individual the in the interview process if they've said, yes, I'm a student of higher education, but they haven't provided any of that additional information. And if we don't get that, it'd be something that we pend for before we can approve SNAP is whether or not they're an eligible student of higher education.
So Andrew, we've got another question. There's a little discussion already starting. Gail asks, can a student apply for SNAP in the months they are not living in the residence hall? And so, and Farron's wondering, maybe, maybe are they living, it probably depends whether they're living at home or living on their own with a friend or something like that.
Yeah, so that's tied less to their student status and more to their living situation. So if they were living at home with their parent in the off time and say they're under 21, because that's our age requirement, or sorry, 22, so 22 or younger, they would have to apply with their parents. But as you mentioned, I think in the subsequent question, if they were living with a friend while working, when they're not in the residence hall, they, as long as they had no familial or blood or marriage relation to that friend they were living with, they would be able to apply separately from that friend on their own. And may be able to carry benefits that they had from their time in the student halls through without any sort of interruption. So it's really not going to be looked at in terms of their student status in that sense, but more their living situation.
Excellent. I want to add a little context to that, and I'm not positive on this, but the other element here is that often when students are living in a residence hall, they're required to have a meal plan. And we know that if more than 50%, so 51% or more of their meals are covered by their meal plan, that they're not eligible for SNAP. So I'm guessing that this question is in regards to being off of their meal plan and then living somewhere else.
And yeah, 22 and under is when they don't have, so like if they were living at home and they were 23, they would be eligible to apply separately from their parents. And thanks everyone for sharing resources with each other in the chat. That's super helpful. Because that's one thing I did not come prepared with was resources.
Sorry, I'm hopping in again. Around that age requirement, I just want to confirm if someone is under 22 but not living with their family, can they apply for their own SNAP case?
Yes.
And then if they were over 22 but they were living with their family, they could have the option to apply on their own if they didn't share meals.
Correct. Yeah. So this next page is the household questions. We ask if anyone in the household is pregnant for SNAP benefits. That would be, again, going towards determining work search requirements and ABOD requirements. Any out-of-state benefits. So if we had received any benefits in the last 3 years for SNAP from another state, we would need to verify with that state that those benefits had been closed before approving benefits here in Oregon. Any tribal benefits that they've had. This, I think, mostly goes towards TANF, but if they have access to tribal benefits, we may need to count certain tribal benefits for them in terms of their income or other benefits that they're receiving. Felony details, if someone's a fleeing felon, they're not eligible for SNAP benefits. So if someone was to disclose that to us, we would unfortunately have to tell them that they're not eligible. And then if anyone's receiving WIC. So resource questions, if anyone has any liquid resources, such as a savings or checking account. Resource limit for SNAP for someone who's categorically eligible is a term that we use. Resources aren't really going to come into play in terms of like checking and savings accounts, things like that. With vehicles, those goes more towards programs like TANF, where we're giving actual cash assistance. I imagine a lot of younger students are probably not going to have, you know, burial insurance, life insurance, prepaid burial agreements, things like that.
These are all just asset tests for individuals. I don't know. I always thought that burial question was weird.
Yeah, I think it's more for a different population than we're talking about now is what I would guess. And I think a lot of these questions go towards specifically like medical programs and things like that, in terms of verifying assets and resources.
And Andrew, we got a couple questions from the last page.
Yeah, question in the chat. As far as I know, WIC does not make them ineligible. I don't have a great answer of why we're asking that question on the SNAP page. I can follow up on that unless someone else in the chat knows. And then to Gail's question, the felony question, no, that is not true. If they're living with someone with a felony, they don't qualify. It's if that individual is considered a fleeing felon. So if they, we can go back and actually look at the specifics of that question real quick. Do you or does anyone in the household have an arrest warrant or are in violation of the terms of their probation or parole? So again, it's if someone was living with someone in that situation, that individual themselves may not be eligible. It wouldn't disqualify the person who's applying. And essentially what's going to happen is we're going to approve who we can in that situation. This is a very rare situation. I think that someone would self-disclose this information to us, and we're not doing any sort of verification on the worker side for this question. If someone was to disclose that, they would just not be eligible to receive a portion of the benefit for themselves. So say that Bobby was applying, he said, oh yeah, I have a warrant and I've been running from the law. We would say, okay, well, Gene's still eligible, but your benefit's going to be reduced because we have to remove you from that benefit group. Again, it's getting a little in the weeds because it's a fairly rare situation that someone would identify this, but that's why that question is being asked, is that if someone is a fleeing felon, they would not be eligible for their portion of the SNAP benefit.
I do think that this question could use some language editing for clarification, because there are people who could have an arrest warrant or be in violation of terms of probation or parole for a misdemeanor charge rather than a felonious charge. So I think when people see the word felony, that means something very specific rather than, you know, criminal charges, criminal arrest warrant. Just a piece of feedback.
Thank you. I'll make a note of that.
And Andrew, is a time check. We're at 11:07. We've got
11:07. Okay. We should be getting kind of to the end. The next major thing we're going to talk about here is income and expenses. So income information. Here we could enter any sort of earned income that the person has, self-employment income, unearned income, unpaid work activity, or specific income. So I think a lot of times what we might see with students is what we would consider unearned income or specific income, if that's in the form of scholarships or grants. The other thing that you may see if they have wages from work study, that would be considered earned income. So we do have a list of some things that would be considered in each of these categories. And one thing that's actually been brought up recently is we don't clearly state in this unearned income section that that's where educational funds would come from. So we're looking at changing the wording there to make that a little bit more clear about that's where we would want them to report that. So let's go ahead and say that Bobby has no self-employment, but he does have unearned income. When you click that, it's going to ask who in the household are you reporting this income for? We're going to say for Bobby. No unpaid work activity and no specific income. And again, this is something that's going to be reviewed with the worker. So if a person, ideally, we want everyone to be able to enter it accurately on their own. And so that's what we strive for. If something isn't entered entirely accurately, that will be able to be corrected before those benefits are processed. So we'll say he has educational assistance. We'll say he's got Perkins loan. So he gets $3,000. This is asking if the income started prior to May 1st. So if I say yes, it's not going to ask me any additional questions. If I say no, it's going to ask me what date was this income start and when was it first received by this individual. That's just determining if we need to count a different amount for the start month. So let's say this started today. When did they receive the first payment? Let's say 8/29/2024.
Why is it May 1st again?
It's so it'd be 3 months prior to the first of the current month. And we could say he received, $50 of that, he received the whole amount of that, whatever that may be, and that will prorate the income in that for that initial month essentially. But we're gonna say it did start, or sorry, we're gonna say no. I'm gonna say it started.
This is another one that confuses the heck out of students because they get an annual award offer, but the way it's presented to them within our systems, it shows both the total amount and the amount that they would receive each term from within that award amount. So for instance, if they're awarded $6,000 of Pell Grant, they're often uncertain how to enter that in this space. And also, it gets even trickier if a student begins here in the middle of the school year, entering in winter term in January or spring term in late March or early April. And also it gets complicated with the date of when financial aid is dispersed. So the start of the term and when the financial aid actually arrives to students' student accounts and when they get any refund they might be eligible for from that are all different dates from each other. So
Yep.
This is another one where we're often best guessing, just trying to do our best and be honest because the formatting here doesn't really match like the student realities a lot of the time of how that timing is, what those amounts are and when.
Absolutely. So it's been something that we are trying to improve on. We actually have a change request in our system now where we're trying to improve the way that this works. So for example, now, as you're mentioning, it's very difficult to accurately capture start date or like when that may be ending or what the period is intended for. What we're trying to implement is saying, as you mentioned, like this income is granted for the school year for like a year period. But that may not be 12 months in the traditional sense of a year. It could be like a 10-month school period, right? So we would say, what's the amount that you received? It was an annual amount, but when is this expected to end? And then we would say, it's a 10-month period, right? And so we would prorate that over the 10 months, and then it would fall off the case after that 10 months. So the idea there, and that's just a very high level overview of what the change is going to look like. The idea there is that we are having hopefully a more accurate way to identify what's being received over the correct amount of time, and that so that also that income isn't staying on the case. Because essentially when we receive verification that this is meant for this school year, we already have an end date, right? And we don't want to have to require that person to come tell us later, like, hey, I'm not getting that money anymore, when they essentially already told us that with their student income verification. I will also say too that a lot of like grants and loans and things wouldn't be necessarily countable. Some things are, a lot of things aren't. And it also requires the worker to compare the costs with what they've received. If there's any amount left over that could be potentially counted. So that kind of leading into that, that's why we ask to just do your best with the options that we have here and submit any sort of financial aid documentation that you have, and then the workers will go through a process of determining what we can exclude and not count on that SNAP case. And in that case, we are leaving it up to the worker essentially to correctly calculate what we're counting and in what periods, and to work with the applicant to determine what makes sense for what they're receiving and what their documentation shows.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too that at some point in the past, like the last year or two, in a DHS training about SNAP student policies, like I'm pretty sure I have a slideshow saved somewhere on my computer that said this information, that told us that federal and state student aid, so federal student loans, Pell Grant, Oregon Opportunity Grant, Oregon Promise Grant, would not be counted as income for a student toward the monthly maximum gross income. If that's not quite accurate, I would really hope that that gets edited in the way that that's trained to folks like me, because I have been now saying that to students.
No, that should be
No,
that should still be accurate. I
okay.
didn't mean to convey that. I just meant there are some types of educational income that could be potentially counted. A lot of it can be excluded, especially like loans, things like that, because that's something that I think the term we use in the eligibility world is this something that needs to be repaid? So we're not going to count that against the person if it's money that they're going to have to pay back. So without being able to give a full list of what is and isn't counted, whatever resources that you have, that hasn't changed anytime recently. So I would feel confident in you still referencing that.
And then, as Pamela puts, unearned income includes scholarships, right?
Correct. Yep.
And students are still needing to provide their award package letter at the end when they are supposed to submit documents, correct?
Yeah, so if they have that available when they're submitting, we actually recently added a reminder in there to please add that.
Okay.
It makes it easier for our workers to determine what can be excluded, and it also will hopefully speed up the processing time so that we don't have to say, we need to verify this, please send us this. If they've already got it and have submitted it, hopefully it can be processed without any sort of delay in their benefits.
What if a student is a prospective student wanting to start in the fall and they're just now getting the steps needed for SNAP application, just recently submitted FAFSA, and Lane or another college has not generated their award package yet? Would they need to reapply once they get that information, or could they potentially get approved for benefits in the time up until they get that award package? Because I've come in that situation a couple times.
Yeah, so they could apply, and if they're found eligible, they have reporting requirements where if their income goes over a certain amount, they would need to report that to us as a change. So if someone gets approved before they have all that information, I'm not going to quote any of the numbers that don't have the reporting requirements here in front of me right now. I would encourage them to understand what their reporting requirements are. And then if their income has gone over that threshold, to report that to ODHS so that we can accurately calculate that information. And same with if for some reason they hadn't reported their student status because they hadn't started school yet, that would be something we would want to know about as well.
Okay, because I had, for example, a student that they're currently not working but were a student, but when they initially tried to apply, they were not asked for their award package. And now that they've attempting to reapply again, not working right now, they had to wait until they got their award package in order to get approved, even though it doesn't take an effect until September of that aid actually going towards their tuition, like the second week of the term. So it's just a little bit confusing navigating students that haven't received it yet or not working and know they should be eligible, but kind of in that limbo period.
Yeah. So not knowing the exact specifics of this case, what that sounds maybe like happened to me is they reported that they were going to be a student. And then we started to try and verify that information. What should have happened is when we tried to verify that, they should have said, I'm not a student for another 2 or 3 months. And then we should have taken student information off of their case or whatever that was holding that up. And then if needed, that would be reported at a later date.
Okay. Yeah, they were registered for fall term back in June. And so they're just in that period of not working, don't have the award package, but they're definitely going to be a student. But yeah, they still got denied. until they had that award package. So just kind of
Yeah, that seems
wondering
like
how
a
to kind of
fail.
work around that. I don't know if the eligibility worker wasn't like looking at the situation, or maybe the student didn't answer the questions correctly. I don't know, but it's weird that they initially got denied until they had the award package, even though it doesn't take an effect until September of them being a current active student with their financial aid kicking in.
Yeah, I would just, based off of your description, I'd say that was a fail in our process. Our workers should have gotten a little curious and asked more questions about, well, if you're saying you're going to be a student, but you don't have any of this information, why is that? And they should have learned, hopefully, because I'm not technically a student yet. So we would look at, what's your situation right now? Like, you're just a person who is not working and not currently in school? Okay, we can approve you for these benefits.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it was a little strange. They're now approved, thankfully, which is amazing. But I was just curious how that works. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. So as we were talking through that, the only thing I really did was add some shelter expenses. That may not be something that a person is paying for out of pocket, but may be included in their financial aid packet, things like that. So again, report what you have. I'm trying to kind of get through to the end of this, so sorry to skip over that quickly. But after we get through the expenses portion there, we get to the rights and responsibilities that tells what the responsibilities of the individual is, as well as their rights when receiving benefits. It's a lot to read through. This will all be sent in the mail as well as shown here on the screen when an individual is applying. Even more information to read up about programs. A lot of this page is about working with child support and TANF and medical and things like that, which isn't going to apply to SNAP applicants. This has something to do with Medicare. And a lot of this is like legal requirements for us to show during the application process that might not apply to everybody. So again, reporting changes. If you get benefits from ODHS or OHA, you have to report certain changes. I will also say, depending on what their status is in terms of SNAP, if they're in what's called simplified reporting, they only need to report certain things. That's going to be reported to them on their notifications they get from the agency. So it's really important that they look over that once they get that information to tell them what they're required to report, what they don't need to report. Penalties. It's about fraud and things like that. Information about anti-discrimination, governor's advocacy, how we use the Social Security information, and how what we do in terms of information sharing. Asking if they're a veteran. If they'd like to register to vote, they can indicate that there, and we'll send them information about that in the mail. We do an electronic signature here, and once we submit that, it should process the application. For SNAP, we're going to be pended for an interview, and they'll have to review this information that they put in on the application with the worker during that interview process. If they've submitted everything that they need to with this, or if we don't need any additional information from them, the worker should be able to approve that during that initial interview call. If anything additional is needed, we would send them a request for information or append to get that additional information from them, allow them time to turn that in. For a new application, that would be 30 days from when they applied. So if they applied today, it would be the about 28th probably of September, and it'll say that on all the documents they receive when they have to return that by. And so as mentioned, this is the miscellaneous document upload page here. We did add recently this point here saying, if you're a student of higher education, please submit any financial aid award letters or other financial aid documents. Again, that's just hopefully if they have it already and can just upload it right here, our workers won't need to pen for that information if they can just determine everything that's on there without any other questions. So if I did upload something, it would show that here. Our training system likes to take its time. Basically, what we're waiting here is to show us what the eligibility determination is. Does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about or about what I've just been talking about for the last few minutes here?
I know the last page that you're just on, it says once you submit your application, an eligibility worker will look it over and contact the student if they need further information. However, sometimes we have students that are needing to get into other programs that we offer in a timely manner to help and best support them. Is it okay for them to call to speak to an eligibility worker that same day to kind of speed up the process to get verified, or is it preferred to have someone just call them when they can after reviewing it?
No, they can call and try to get an available appointment. That's encouraged.
Yeah, sometimes I do that with students if they're like needing it like sooner rather than later. If they have the time to wait in the office, we'll sit and help them call them. But I just didn't know if that's something that you guys would prefer not to happen.
No, certainly if they would like to contact us, we'll do what we can to get them with an
Okay,
eligibility worker.
perfect. Thank you.
So I'm reading this one in the chat here.
We'll have to wrap up. Oh, yeah. Farron commented that we really need to be training our eligibility workers need to know more about these student policies, because I'm sure everyone here has experienced difficulties of an eligibility worker not fully up to date on the nuances of student enrollment eligibility.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with that. I think it's something that as an agency, as going back to my time as eligibility worker, something that we really wanted to focus on. And it is, as you all know, can be fairly complicated. So we're not perfect. I think we all have, in terms of agency workers, all have room to improve. That's definitely an area that I would agree I'd like to see some improvement in. I would also encourage if a student feels like something wasn't determined correctly, reach out to us and ask us, ask to have that reviewed, say like, hey, this isn't correct. We have appeals processes. I know that's kind of a pain in the butt to go through all that after you've already gone through the application process. But if something's really not sitting right, I encourage, appeal that decision to see if maybe we did make a mistake and that can be fixed.
I don't know if this is how staffing is run or would ever be run at DHS offices with eligibility workers, but I think it would be so great to have a couple eligibility workers at each DHS office location, as best as possible anyway, who is sort of receiving or has received like higher level specialized training about certain populations like this. There's like 4 million people in the state of Oregon, and about 6 or 7% of those are college students. So it's a small percentage, but it's not a minuscule one either. And I totally understand that maybe eligibility workers in general do not have time to have such granular understanding of policy for these smaller demographic groups. But it would be so great if there was sort of a, student SNAP policy specialist subset within eligibility workers that could be distributed among DHS locations. That way, if a student is applying and has complex questions, there's someone, I don't know, I'm not sure what I'm saying. I'm sort of processing out loud, but yeah, I fully understand the eligibility workers have so much policy to store in their minds and ask about in interviews. It gets messy sometimes, but I'd just love to see it get messy less.
Totally agree.
Yeah, Farron, you bring up some good points. And I see we're getting still questions in the chat. I want to point out that we have a venue to do much of this follow-up work, and that is our office hour that's going to be in a little less than 2 weeks. It's going to be Wednesday, the 11th at 2 o'clock. If you don't already have the invite, let me know, and we'll make sure to get that for you. And we already have some questions we can discuss then. Andrew, do you have anything else to say to close, since we unfortunately ran out of time?
Yeah, I guess I appreciate everyone for being here. I hope this was helpful. I hope I was able to provide at least a little bit of insight to most of your questions. I've been taking notes too. If there's anything I can follow up on, I'll send that over through James. One thing I'll say we didn't get to is the mobile application. What you can do with the mobile application is view benefits, look at penned requests. So you can't apply for benefits online yet, but if you have applied or through the mobile app yet, excuse me. But if you have applied already and you've been determined to be pending, you can see that information on the mobile application and you can respond to that directly through the mobile application by uploading documents there. You can report changes in income, you can report changes in contact information and address. And to access that mobile application, you download it through any mobile app store, Android, iPhone, things like that. And you use the same login information that you use for the website. So it's a great way, although you can't apply yet for benefits there, it's a great way to manage benefits that have already been approved or that are pending. You can also view all of your notifications and messages there as well. So just my little pitch for that.
No plug.
Yeah.
The last minute. I just want to say thank you so much, Andrew, for coming in and walking us through this. I think it's been a while since we've gotten to go in depth into Oregon One, and it's great to see under the hood. And I also just want to appreciate, all of the changes that have happened in the past couple of years since we've been engaged in this work. It's great to see. I know sometimes it takes a lot of time, but it's good to see that improvements are being made. So thank you.